All right, everyone, get ready, because today we're doing a deep dive on a topic that's, well, let's just say it's a little spicy, shall we? We're talking fetishes. And to guide us through this fascinating world, we're turning to fetishhandbook.com.
And it's not just about, the what, it's about the why. This website really digs into the history, the psychology, the cultural side of it all.
Right, like where does this stuff even come from?
Exactly. And they don't shy away from tackling some of the misconceptions surrounding fetishes either.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, take the whole fetish versus kink debate.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people use these terms interchangeably, but fetishhandbook.com makes a clear distinction between the two.
Okay, so for those of us who maybe need a little refresher, what's the difference?
So according to the site, a fetish is a strong, often enduring sexual interest in something not typically seen as sexual. We're talking objects, materials, situations, you name it.
Okay.
A kink, on the other hand, is more about exploring preferences outside of the mainstream, but it doesn't necessarily have that same intensity or psychological root as a fetish.
Interesting. So, like, a kink might be something you dabble in, but a fetish is more like a core part of who you are, sexually speaking.
You got it. And what I find fascinating is that fetishhandbook.com really tries to understand those deeper desires, those fetishes. They explore the psychological and cultural factors at play, even going back in history to see how certain fetishes have been viewed over time.
Wow, so we're talking like a deep, deep dive here.
Oh, absolutely. They even have this whole section called the Fetish Lexicon.
Yeah.
Think of it like a curated encyclopedia of, desires. It's honestly pretty eye-opening.
Okay, you can't just leave me hanging like that. Give me some examples. What kind of stuff are we talking about in this lexicon?
Well, prepare to be surprised because we're talking things like jeans, raincoats, even eye contact.
Whoa, okay. See, now you're making me rethink everything I thought I knew.
That's the beauty of it, right? Fetishhandbook.com encourages us to approach this topic with curiosity rather than judgment, and to recognize that what might seem unusual to one person can be totally normal and fulfilling for someone else.
I like that. So it's not about, sensationalizing or judging these desires. It's about understanding them.
Exactly. And a big part of that is understanding where these desires even come from.
Right, like why are some people into feet while others are into, well, raincoats?
And that's where things get really interesting because fetishhandbook.com doesn't shy away from the more complex, or I guess you could say taboo aspects of fetishes either.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How do they handle those conversations without, crossing any lines?
It's all about context and responsibility. They present information in a very factual way, always emphasizing consent, respect, and safety. They're very clear about distinguishing between healthy expressions of desire and, behaviors that are harmful or exploitative.
It's like they're saying, look, these desires exist, and here's what we know about them, but let's make sure we're always prioritizing the well-being and agency of everyone involved.
Exactly. It's not about endorsing any particular fetish. It's about providing information and fostering understanding within a framework of ethical behavior.
Which, at the end of the day, is what matters most, right?
Absolutely. Because behind every fetish, behind every desire, there's a story. And I think fetishhandbook.com does a great job of reminding us of that.
I agree. So we've talked about what fetishes are, the difference between fetishes and kinks, and even touched on some of the more, shall we say, delicate aspects of this topic. But now I want to know more about the why. What does fetishhandbook.com have to say about how these desires develop?
Well, they dive into all sorts of theories and research. We're talking biological factors, early childhood experiences, even things like cultural influences, and how societal norms shape our understanding of what's considered normal or taboo.
Right, because what's considered taboo in one culture might be totally normal in another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that our own perceptions of what's normal are constantly evolving. Fetishhandbook.com even talks about how certain fetishes that were once seen as completely out there are now becoming more mainstream.
It makes you wonder what the future holds, right? Like, what will be considered a fetish in 50 years? What will be considered normal? I mean, it really makes you think.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about fetishhandbook.com. It gets you thinking, questioning, and exploring these topics in a way that's both informative and thought-provoking.
Well said. Well, we've only just scratched the surface of this topic, but I'm already feeling like I need to take a moment to process all of this.
A lot to unpack.
It really is. But don't worry, everyone. We're not done yet. We'll be back in a bit to dive even deeper into fetishhandbook.com and explore some of the theories behind how these intriguing desires develop. All right, so before the break, we were talking about how fetishhandbook.com explores the reasons behind why people develop fetishes, and it sounds like they're not afraid to get into some pretty complex theories.
Oh, absolutely. They really go deep, looking at everything from evolutionary biology to social conditioning.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. Let's start with the biology side. What kind of arguments are they making there?
Well, one theory they discuss is the idea that certain fetishes might be linked to our survival instincts.
Survival instinct.
Yeah, like take, for example, the foot fetish. Some researchers believe it could be connected to the fact that our feet are highly sensitive and play a crucial role in our balance and movement.
I never thought of it like that.
Right, it's a totally different way of looking at it. And then there's the whole idea of pheromones and how they might play a role in attraction.
Oh, yeah, like those scents we give off that supposedly drive people wild.
Exactly. Some scientists believe that certain scents, even those we might not consciously notice, can trigger a sexual response.
Fascinating. So it's possible that some fetishes are rooted in these deep-seated biological responses that we're not even aware of.
Precisely. But here's the thing. Fetishhandbook.com doesn't just stop at biology. They also explore the role of psychology and early childhood experiences.
Okay, now that's a whole other can of worms. How do our childhoods factor into all of this?
Well, one theory is that fetishes can develop through a process called conditioning. This is where a neutral object or sensation becomes sexually charged because it's repeatedly associated with a pleasurable experience.
So, like if someone had a really positive experience involving, say, a certain type of fabric when they were younger.
Then later in life, that fabric could trigger a sexual response.
Okay.
Exactly. It's like our brains create these associations that can last a lifetime.
Wow, that's pretty wild when you think about it. Our brains are strange and mysterious things.
They really are.
Yeah.
And fetishhandbook.com also gets into some of the more psychoanalytic theories like Freud's work on fetishism, but I think we'll save that for another deep dive.
Good call. We could probably spend a whole episode unpacking Freud. So we've talked biology and psychology, but what about the cultural side of things? How does that play into the development of fetishes?
Well, fetishhandbook.com argues that culture plays a huge role in shaping what we find attractive and what we consider to be taboo.
Which makes sense, right? What's considered normal or acceptable in one culture might be totally different in another.
Exactly. Take, for instance, how certain clothing items have been fetishized over time, like corsets, for example.
Okay, yeah.
They were once seen as a symbol of oppression, but now they're often associated with sexuality and empowerment.
It's interesting how those perceptions can shift so dramatically, and it makes you wonder, what role does media play in all of this?
Oh, they definitely touch on that too. Fetishhandbook.com talks about how the media we consume, whether it's movies, TV shows, or even advertising, can influence our desires and perceptions of what's considered attractive.
Right. Like, think about all those movies where the librarian suddenly takes off her glasses and lets her hair down, and everyone's like, whoa, she's hot now.
Exactly. It's all about how those images and narratives shape our subconscious desires.
It's amazing how all of these factors, from our biology to our upbringing to the media we consume, can come together to influence something as personal and complex as our sexuality.
It really is. And I think that's what makes fetishhandbook.com such a valuable resource. It acknowledges that there's no single answer to the question of why we develop fetishes. It's a combination of factors that make us who we are.
I couldn't agree more. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today, but I still have one big question. If fetishhandbook.com is all about understanding fetishes, do they actually provide any, well, guidance on how to, explore those desires?
That's a great question. And it's one we'll be diving into right after the break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
All right, so we're back, and I'm dying to know, does fetishhandbook.com actually offer any advice for people who, want to explore their fetishes?
They do, but not in the way you might think. It's not like a how-to guide or anything.
Okay, so what is it then?
It's more about providing resources and information to help people navigate those desires safely and ethically.
Makes sense. Safety first, always.
Exactly. They emphasize things like consent, communication, and setting boundaries.
Which are all crucial, no matter what kind of sexual activity you're into.
Absolutely. They also talk about the importance of self-awareness and understanding your own desires.
Right, like figuring out what you're into and what you're not into.
Precisely. And they encourage people to approach exploration with a sense of curiosity and respect, both for themselves and for their partners.
I like that. So it's not just about, like, fulfilling a fantasy. It's about personal growth and understanding, too.
Exactly. And they also acknowledge that not everyone is comfortable exploring their fetishes with a partner.
Which is totally fine.
Absolutely. And for those people, they offer suggestions for exploring those desires solo in a safe and healthy way.
That's great. So they're really trying to cover all the bases here.
They are. And one thing I really appreciate is that they emphasize the importance of seeking professional help if you're struggling with a fetish that's causing distress or interfering with your life.
That's so important because sometimes those desires can be, well, a little complicated.
They can be.
Hmm.
But I think the biggest takeaway from fetishhandbook.com is that it's okay to be curious about these things. It's okay to explore your desires.
As long as you're doing it safely and responsibly.
Right.
Exactly. And remember, there are resources out there to help you navigate those desires in a healthy and fulfilling way.
Well said. Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about fetishes themselves, but about the incredible diversity of human desire.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so too. So for those of you who are ready to learn more and maybe do a little exploring of your own, be sure to check out fetishhandbook.com. It's an incredible resource, and I can't recommend it enough. And as always, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of, well, everything. We'll see you next time.